Greetings, everyone. Welcome back to yet another episode, fun-filled episode, I might add, of the Carnival of Randomness. I'd like to begin with a quote from the great Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., because this actually is related to today. We are not makers of history, we are made by history. However, in this case, we're going to be made by historical fiction. Coming to you live, actually, from the fiction section at the Russian State Library in Moscow, one of the top 10 largest libraries in the world with over 44.5 million items on catalog. I am Zach.
Hi, I'm Rob Dostoevsky, everybody.
Yeah, spell that. Anyway, we're going
Can't even say it.
Oh, yeah. We're going to be talking historical fiction, and I think we're going to start off with what is historical fiction, because it's a very odd genre that a lot of people really can't fully explain, so...
I think the way to explain it is, okay, an autobiography that's real people. Now, for example, say we do one on Jackie Robinson now. Say I was a journalist in it, and I'm not real, but you're seeing it through my eyes. That would be historical fiction. A straight biography would be just about all real people, even if Hollywood gets it wrong, as they often do.
Well, yes, because Hollywood does love to take their creative liberties. You know, the most recently, the Churchill movie.
I actually saw Darkest Hour yesterday, so I can't. Gary Oldman looked like Winston Churchill, I guess.
See, I haven't seen that one. I mean, the Brian Cox one simply called Churchill, which was basically a giant propaganda film.
I mean, it was almost like the end of Star Trek, the one that was Dunkirk.
Yeah. Boy. But anyway, we're going to be discussing historical fiction. So basically, things like based on a real thing, but fabricated in some way.
And also, it's going to be movies and books and maybe crossovers because they become movies.
Well, then why don't we start with a crossover, The Terror. It's a new series, just premiered season 1 this past year on, what, AMC?
Was it AMC, I think?
AMC, based off of a book, and it's a fictionalized account of Sir Captain John Franklin's Antarctic expeditions with the HMS Terror and the HMS Erebus. Most of the characters in the show are real.
The doctor is, I know
Dr.
that.
Goodsir. I actually wrote some down. Sir John Franklin was real.
That was his real name, too, Goodsir.
Yeah, Francis Crozier was real. James Fitzjames was real as well. Only thing is, spoiler alert, if you haven't seen the show or read the book, the Toonbach, the... What would you call the Inuit or
they pronounce it is it Eskimo? The way they pronounce Eskimo, but they pronounce it differently. It's supposed to be 19th century. So
yeah,
they pronounce it. It's Esquamatic.
Esquamatic or something of that. But basically, it's the story of Franklin's expedition to one of the poles, Arctic. I think it was the Arctic, and they met with all kinds of just terrible calamities. I don't know how they survived. I've read several books on them. They're very good. It's an incredible story. But this one takes it and spins it into they're being hunted by a supernatural native or indigenous creature, the Toonbach, who you told me was the Bumble from...
I swear it is. The book was by Dan Simmons, and he's written a lot of different things. He's actually written science fiction books about the Iliad and the Odyssey and Hyperion, but he's very interested in exploration. He does one book in the Himalayas that have Nazis, the Yeti, if it's the Yeti or not, but he did this one, and it really is the Bumble. I swear it's the Bumble, before he turned good, obviously.
Now, you've read the book. Have you seen any of the show?
No, I actually have it on loan from the library, plug for library, so they don't kick us out here.
See, I'm actually on the opposite end. I have not read the book yet, but I have seen the show.
Ridley Scott produces it.
Yeah, Ridley Scott, I think, was a producer, executive producer. He was involved in it. Didn't direct it, I don't believe. But in any way, they are releasing a second season, which... I'll have to read the book and see how that's going to work. But that's a good one because it was a book that was turned into a TV show. Good crossover.
For all you young viewers out here, The Three Musketeers is not just a candy bar. The Three Musketeers is a famous book by Alexandre Dumas, who was, in his time, there's been an analogy made between him and Elton John, where they said Elton in the 70s would do tons of songs. You did some good ones and a lot of bad ones. And I guess that's why Dumas's books were known that. And it's back in the court of Louis XIII from 1625 to 28. It's about the King's Musketeers, Porthos, Aramis, and what the heck was the other name?
Athos.
Thank you, I forgot that.
Athos, Porthos, and Aramis.
And D'Artagnan. And
the fourth of the Three Musketeers.
And D'Artagnan was compared in the beginning of the book. The analogy is made to Don Quixote on Rocinante, his horse. And all the thing about this is they were all based on real people, it turned out. There's some speculation that D'Artagnan was the man in the Iron Mask, but at any rate, he was killed in a battle, took a cannonball to the head at 42. But it mixes all these guys up. They were all real. They never met in real life, though. And they have them going, they're the King's Guards, and they have them going against Count de Rochefort, who was not addressing he's a villain, but he was not real, or Milady de Winter. But Richelieu was the other villain in it. The thing about that is Louis XIII was a dunce, but Richelieu was the power behind the throne. He wasn't really a bad guy, but they needed ones, I guess. And then Louis XIII bounced out for the Sun King. But a lot of it, they take all these events at court, and they take these guys together that never were really together, even though they were real. And they did this in the movie adaptation in the 70s was really good. And they split it into two, and they only paid the actor for one. So take it for what it is. It's a lot of fun, though.
The one I liked had Oliver Platt in it.
Oh, that one?
With Charlie Sheen, I believe.
Yeah.
Yeah. And don't forget, Louis XIII then begat Louis XIV, who made an excellent cognac.
And was the Sun King, who reigned for 80 years or something. He had two stomachs. He had as many children as Ben Franklin.
Which is a lot. Moving on to same continent, different era. It's I can't remember what year it came out. It was in the late 60s, I believe. The movie by Stanley Kubrick called Barry Lyndon. It was set in, I think, 1750s Ireland? Ireland or Scotland? No, Ireland. I'm sorry, Europe, for that. Basically, it's the trials and tribulations of a young man named Barry Lyndon, played by Ryan O'Neal, I believe it was. Set in an actual historical time period. Visually stunning movie. I mean, Kubrick went as far as to film it all in natural lighting, had period experts come in to make sure that the buttons on the clothing were exactly what they would have been in that time period. And Barry Lyndon was not a real person.
No, I think a lot of it was his adaptation almost. I think there's a book by Thackeray, I may be wrong.
It's based off the Thackeray
book. It reminds me a lot of Candide in a way, because it's somebody who, not to spoil it, but things won't go right.
If you're spoiling Candide, I think we're having a problem.
No.
At this point. But, I mean, Barry Lyndon, he goes through, he ends up, I think he's shot in it's been a while since I've seen the movie.
He ends up in a duel, and what happens is he almost does an Alexander Hamilton. I'm not going to shoot, so the other guy shoots him in the leg.
Yeah, he shot him in the leg, and he had a pronounced limp for the rest of his life, and then it was just him going through and just trying to get his life back together. I like the movie. It's hard to watch because I think it's a little long.
Well, that's Stanley.
That's Kubrick for you. But that's the kind of thing we're talking about. It doesn't necessarily have to be based on a specific event or person.
But it tries to bring a period to life, like a time, and it tries to extrapolate on it.
And that one definitely did for mid-18th century Ireland.
One of the ones I like, and I'm going to try to pronounce the name of the movie because it's long, no pun intended, The Bingalong Motor Kings and Traveling All-Stars, or it's the Bingalong All-Stars and Traveling Motor Team. And this is a period piece about the Negro Leagues. And it evolves around a barnstorming team that's run by Bingo Long, played by Billy D. Williams. And it has also Richard Pryor as the pitcher. James Earl Jones is in it. They say to heck with it. They're not treated well by their team, so they branch out. They go traveling across the country. This happened all the time back in those days. Babe Ruth.
Oh, Babe Ruth was a barnstormer.
And they go on about the problems they have with crooked stadium owners who try to fix the games and going through all the tribulations. Unfortunately, in those days, well, you can't stay at the hotel. And there's actually, they bring up a lot of players from the real days of those days. And that's why I wonder, look it up, Randomites. I don't know if Bingo Long was a real person or not. But they bring up Josh Gibson a lot. And that's a really good story. Josh Gibson was considered by many to be the best player of all time. And there's a story about him.
I think even Babe Ruth considered him to be one of the greatest baseball players of all time. He unfortunately died very young due to, I think he had a brain tumor or some sort of brain issue, unfortunately. Played the entirety of baseball career in the Negro Leagues in the Pittsburgh area with the Homestead Grays and the Pittsburgh Crawfords, mainly with the Homestead Grays, but he was a power hitter, and I know his
What did he play, actually? What position? I wanted to say catcher, but usually first, third. Look it up, Randomites.
I think he was an infielder, I think. But
you weren't joshing about that, though, I hope.
No, not at all. But in any event, he, I think his Hall of Fame plaque reads something along the lines of over 800 home runs because, obviously, records at that time period for any sport are spotty at best. But I think even more so for the Negro Leagues.
The Negro Leagues were amazing, though. I mean, there's somebody, Mamie Peanut Johnson. We tried to look her up one time. What did this guy do?
Yeah,
wasn't a guy.
Yeah, thought it was a male player, but no, she was one of the few female players in the Negro Leagues. Pitched for the Indianapolis Clowns.
But there's a story about Josh that may not be real, maybe.
And this is another historical fiction, a tall tale, as it were. Pittsburgh was playing Washington, I believe, in Pittsburgh. Josh Gibson hits a towering home run. The ball is never found. They never see it land. So the next day, they switch cities. They go down to Washington. The teams are just about to come out. The game is about to start, and a ball flies out of nowhere. One of the infielders for Washington catches it. Nobody knows where this ball came from. Look around. The umpire looks at it, turns to Josh Gibson, and says, "You're out yesterday in Pittsburgh."
It's amazing. You wonder how old he was, too, for real, because they lied about those things, too.
Josh Gibson?
He died young, though.
He died, I think he was in his 30s?
Well, I think Satchel Paige was 100 by the time he got to the majors.
Yeah, I think mid to late 40s Satchel Paige. But that was a good one. Now, all right, I got a question for you. It was something I thought of. How would you classify American gods?
Ian McShane is God, no matter what he does.
Well, right.
Well, that's
but
mythology. In a way, you could say it's historic because they use mythology and they try to play it into Americana about the idea that technology's become the new gods for America.
And you think about it, I think it's a modern day telling of, I'm going to butcher the name of the Titanomachi?
I don't know.
It's when the Pantheon overthrew the Titans on Olympus.
I just don't know which that one is.
It's basically the one where Hades and Zeus and Poseidon, they drew lots after they overthrew the Titans and cast them out. It's basically the old gods versus the new gods in a battle for superiority.
That's what it really is. In a lot of ways, Mr. Wednesday, who's Ian McShane in the series and in the book, he's not Ian McShane because Ian McShane we think is real, even though he's incredible.
No,
but they have the Thunderbird in there from Native American.
They have the Thunderbird, the Queen of Sheba.
Yeah. Easter.
Yeah, Easter, Esther, however you want to pronounce the Germanic goddess of the spring. Who was in the show? It was Peter Stormare. Oh, Chernobog from Slavic.
And Vulcan was in it.
The
guy with the hand. Was that Thor? The one who's going to bonk the guy on the head?
No, that was Chernobog.
Oh, it's Chernobog.
That worked in the meatpacking industry. Yeah, that was Chernobog. He is the Slavic goddess of death, or Slavic god, sorry, Peter, of death.
Yep, you're in trouble now.
And by the way, we should mention the book, which was written by Neil Gaiman. Fantastic book.
It is, and he just did a graphic novel of it, which turns it around a little bit.
I need to check that out.
But this is Neil. We'll give a show on him eventually. All things Neil.
But that's what I think, because you have to look at mythology essentially as historical fiction. It's trying to explain what's actually happened in a way that, I think, for lack of a better term, that can keep the people under wraps.
To go on a tangent about that a little, there's a book out, it's about almost Fantastic Beasts, and what happens in it is that they try to explain, where do these myths come from? There's a sea monster book by Richard Ellis who does that, but this one's like, okay, the basilisk is probably King Cobra, stuff like that, tries to make fiction. What is this really? Because everything's based on something.
Or the old maritime legends of the mermaids, they think were basically either narwhals or manatees.
Yeah, and the Gorgons, which was pre-dinosaur, a lot of them thought those were dragon bones.
Yeah. So it's all based on historical fact and scientific fact some way. So that's, I'll throw my head in.
I think that works.
I'll throw my head in for mythology on that one. Another TV show, MASH. I've mentioned it before. I like the show. It's based off of, obviously, the Mobile Army Surgical Hospital units in the Korean War. But all these characters weren't real.
No, there wasn't.
But it's based on the historic event of the Korean War, although the show lasted, 2.5 times as long as the Korean War itself actually lasted.
And they got rid of the one character who was in it because I guess there were not any black surgeons there.
In the first season there was a character, a black surgeon named Spearchucker Jones.
He was in the movie. He was played by Fred the Hammer Williamson, was he not?
I believe he was. And one of the things I've heard was that he was written out because there weren't any black surgeons.
I thought maybe because the name was offensive a little bit.
Well, don't forget this was in the 1970s, so it was a little different then. I mean, I could be wrong. Prove me wrong, Internet.
No, but I don't think so because I know there were Korean surgeons there because my dad's doctor was one of them, but I never heard of that. But you could figure that one out.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there may have been. I think there may have been Army surgeons. African American Army surgeons, but I don't know if they were actually in the front line areas.
No, well, look it up, find it out. That's what we're here for. We don't know everything or very much, but we try.
It depends.
But there's one I was really interested in. This was better than expected. I watched the movie The Great Waldo Pepper, and this is Robert Redford. He's a World War I vet who sort of embellishes his record a lot. But in the days of the 20s, when aviation was just coming around, they finally got it right. Back in Kitty Hawk, and they started driving around. They had World War I. It became almost like the traveling ice capades in the 20s and 30s, where these pilots would barnstorm and they'd pop up in an area, settle down, go around. Hey, you want to ride for $5? They take you up. You could tell everybody you flew around in one of these things. And Redford's this fictional character named Waldo Pepper, who always says, I met the greatest pilot ever in World War I. He gets found out by another pilot that he's lying because this guy actually flew in this squadron. They get busted for a couple things. There's a tragedy that happens. They end up flying in an air show. Then they go on to be Hollywood stunt pilots. And eventually Redford goes against this German flying ace, and they're doing stunts, almost like a Howard Hughes type Hell's Angels movie. I don't know if anybody's real, and I know Waldo Pepper is it, but it really establishes the era well. And you think back in those days how really neat that was. You get these guys flying around the country in these puddle jumpers, and it was fun. It was just one of those movies that I went in going, I've never seen it, I'll give it a look. Better than expected, and it really got the era right.
Well, and speaking of the era, I thought of one. How about Memoirs of a Geisha?
Oh. I know nothing about except the title. So
you've never seen it, or
no?
I've seen the movie. I've never read the book, unfortunately. But the movie starred. I have it written down, and I apologize because Chinese names are incredible, or Japanese names are incredibly difficult to pronounce for us Westerners. Sang Ji and the wonderful Ken Watanabe.
Oh, we know that. Did Amy Tan write that or somebody?
It was written by an American, of all things. I can't remember his name, but it was an American author who wrote the book. And basically, the Memoirs of a Geisha tells the story from an unnamed narrator. I can't remember if the narrator was unnamed, but going through the process of becoming a geisha. Now, I know that the term geisha often has negative connotations, meaning like, some sort of escort or, sex worker. But the fact of the matter is that geisha were very well trained. What would be the good word?
Servants, helpers,
not even
maids,
servants, compatriots or people. They were courtesans.
Yeah, courtesans. Maybe.
And they were provided incredible training in music and poetry and dance and theater to basically be companions for wealthy businessmen or GIs or whatever. And that was their job. They had dinner with them, served them food, told them stories about Japan and Japanese culture. It's a fascinating thing, and for us as Westerners not really understanding it fully, I think this movie gives us a really good look into it. It's not all as glamorous as I've just apparently tried to make it out to be. However, it's a fascinating period. I think it was...
I honestly don't know anything. I just know when you hear escort services, you think, aha, another politician's going to bite it.
Well, yeah. But, no, if I find it out, I'll post it. I can't remember who.
I know
wrote
they
the book.
have them; they really exist. But
They really do
found,
exist.
Like, kind of weird. I'm going to call somebody. I want you to go on a date with me, or something.
Well, that's the thing.
I feel weird, but maybe the cultures are different.
And I don't think it was so much you called them and you set up a date. It's you went to a function and they were provided, basically as entertainers. Like you've seen them in modern day shows. They have them still in some of the high end restaurants and inns in Japan, and they come out. They play music, play drinking games, things like. It's a fascinating thing, and I think
that's fascinating culture.
It is. The Japanese culture is amazingly fascinating.
Since we talk literature, I think this is the king of historical fiction, Bernard Cornwall.
Oh, yes.
There's so much I could talk about here with them and what he does. And I'll just, in the general overview, he always takes real historical situations, uses some real characters. He will apologize sometimes because he will have to make somebody a villain, just like sort of like Richelieu was in the Three Musketeers, who's really not, but you need a heavier, you don't have a story. He's done so many books. He's done the Sharp series, which is like a soldier who gets in all the Napoleonic Wars. He's a British soldier. He's been played by Sean Bean on a series of shows, I think on AMC. They're not in order, but they run all the way from the 1800s.
Wait, Sean Bean survived the filming of it?
Yep.
Oh, wow.
Somehow, and he made it all the way to, I think, Waterloo. He finally goes because they have to age. He's done Redcoat, which is about the Civil War. What am I saying? The Revolution. No, and that's Copperhead.
Yeah, honestly, that's the only Cornwall book I've read, and up till now, I should say. And yes, it was based on the Revolutionary War, but it was from the British perspective.
Yeah, that's why it's Redcoat.
And it was quite fascinating. And at the very end of the book, he said he gives little notes on what he changed and how it was different from what actually
happened. That's what
happened.
I love. He does. One of the ones I like are the Norseman saga. This is Uhtred of Babenberg. I think there's a series on it now called Northland. Something. There's a series. It might not be something on there. But what it is, he's a lord. He gets kidnapped by the Vikings. Then he goes back to the English. It's in the time of Alfred the Great, and afterwards he's trying to get his castle Babenberg back from his corrupt uncle. He's always switching alliances. And then, again, Cornwall goes on at the end about the historical fact about this. And one of the interesting parts about it is Alfred the Great, who was one of the greatest kings, probably saved Britain. He established modern Britain. He's probably buried underneath a shopping mall somewhere because his body got swiped by monks.
I've heard that. And didn't they find Richard III's skeleton under a parking lot somewhere?
And he's also done Nathaniel Starbuck, who's a whaler. I've never read those, so I'm no help. He's done the Copperhead saga. He's done the Warlord, who was not a wrestler in the Powers of Pain. This was a historical view of King
Shout out to the Warlord,
Arthur.
by the way.
Yeah, who we love him, and I wouldn't want Haku to beat us up. But one of the other ones he does is something like that, which I now forgot because.
Thank you. You're welcome.
But
it'll come back here. Yeah.
Oh, the Warlord, King Arthur. Then it tries to do the real King Arthur, not the one in the Sword in the Stone, Merlin, but he tries to establish Merlin as being from a druidic cult. But he tries to do it for real, and he does a trilogy of that. He does the Archer's trilogy, which is about Agincourt. I mentioned the Shakespeare one he just did, but he's fascinating because he really just weaves it so well, makes these characters up, and you want to read. That's the beauty of it. You want to go and read the real history then.
Well, that's the good thing about historical fiction is that it gives people reason to check out something that actually happened. But since you mentioned in trying to make a villain just for the sake of having a villain, let's talk Braveheart.
Yeah.
It's not even on my list, but Braveheart, we know the story. William Wallace fighting for Scottish independence against the British, then betrayed by Robert the Bruce. But they needed a villain, because in reality, the nickname Braveheart was for Robert the Bruce, not for William Wallace.
You need villains. It's the one. So this is going off the thing a little bit, but I guess for the Express with Ernie Davis, they had to do a thing where they're playing in Virginia or somewhere in the South, and they had the crowd rioting and everything because they're all racist. What happened was they all cheered. They look at the footage, but you have to have bad guys in the movies. So it's no fun.
Well, exactly. And I just watched Hidden Figures recently, and they took a couple liberties like that in saying that NASA was segregated for these African-American women. Actually, no. By the time NASA was created as NASA, the first thing they did was get rid of all desegregated areas to bring everybody together. But you have to have some conflict like that in movies.
And you have to give credit to the one king that was in Braveheart because he survived being the jailer in Krull.
Oh, God, he did. I forgot about that.
I thought Liam Neeson was the head jailer, but it was the other guy.
No,
Then he
it
survived
wasn't.
to go on. He screwed over William Wallace as well, which probably didn't really happen.
Yeah.
And Longshanks was not, from what I've read, Longshanks was not like Mr. Evil as king, but again, you just need the bad apples in there.
Well, exactly. And without Robert the Bruce turning on William Wallace and selling him out to the British, it wouldn't have been as powerful a movie. Like I say, and now the Scottish people are really starting to have a much greater appreciation for Robert the Bruce, because he really was the true face of the Scottish independence.
Yeah, true.
And he was the first king of Scotland.
Yeah, he was. Wasn't Idi Amin the way he
No,
claimed.
he was the last king of
Idi
Scotland.
always claimed that he was Scottish, was going to recapture the thing. Nobody wanted him for some reason. I don't know why.
Yeah. Well, in talking about another historical fiction and speaking with a dear friend of mine the other day, and I mentioned this to you earlier, Titanic. Yes, we know about the Titanic. Spoiler alert, the boat sank. If you don't know that, I'm sorry for you. But it's the whole love story, the Jack and Rose thing, that was fictionalized. You had, obviously, the boat was real. The events that happened on the boat, to the boat, I should say, were real.
I would say the captain was real.
Yeah, Captain
like
Smith.
The Astors.
Captain Smith was real. Unsinkable Molly Brown, played by the fantastic Kathy Bates, was a real character.
Well, there was
real
supposed
person,
to be,
I should say.
supposedly, they had the thing where we want to die as gentlemen. They had some of the millionaires sitting there, and when it was flooding,
Yeah.
I would be more of a coward, I admit that.
Yeah, I not being there and not really, and now with the last survivor of the Titanic having died, who was an infant at the time, nobody knows for a fact.
And there's that, again, a story that's probably hyperbole or whatever, where some guy was drunk and he survived.
Yeah.
He didn't even realize it was sinking. They shoved him on a boat.
Yeah.
And they had guys dressing up as women to get on the boats.
I mean, it very well could have happened.
Now, you think you're gonna die in 3 hours. And I'm not that brave, I admit it.
But that's another great example. It takes a very well-known, well, except when the movie came out, people were actually wondering why the boat sank, and that actually gave me very severe pains. But in any event, it was an actual event that was built, that was the foundation for a fictionalized storyline.
I have one that's, I find this one a lot of fun because I really like Sherlock Holmes a lot. And every now and then you'll see a fictional, well-known character brought into something that was real. And there's a movie called Murder by Decree, and it stars Donald Sutherland. He's Sherlock Holmes. And what it is Sherlock Holmes tries to solve the case of Jack the Ripper. What happens in this one, there's plenty of theories about Jack the Ripper. They use the Masonic theory where he was Sir William Gull was trying to cover up for evil deeds by Prince Edward.
You also have the Jack the Ripper that's buried in Rochester in the Holy Sepulchre.
Francis Tumblety. We could do a whole show on him because he might. He could be Freddie the Barber for all we know.
Could be Jill the Ripper.
Theories. But they have Sherlock trying to solve it. He gets close to the case, and then they sort of told, hey, back off or something bad's going to happen to you. But they try to get the events of Jack down, right? Just they bring in a character who's obviously not real. But that's one of these things like that where it really is history, but it's okay. What would happen if we brought this character in who doesn't exist, but it might be kind of neat. He'd be there. So,
and one I thought of, it's a recent movie.
Oh, no.
Yeah, The Great Wall with Matt Damon, the random white guy in medieval China. And it was... I didn't watch it. I'm not going to lie. I just saw the previews for it and realized I shouldn't watch it.
I saw it. It reminded me of... Anybody ever see The 13th Warrior with Anthony Banderas? It was based on Eaters by the Dead by Michael Crichton. That's what it reminded me of in a weird way.
Except for the fact that they say the reason that the Great Wall of China was built was not to keep out Mongol invaders, but rather to keep out dragons. So, there you go. The only historical part of that movie is China and the Great Wall of China.
I don't know if anybody was real in it. I doubt it.
I don't know. And why?
How did these guys get over there at that time either?
Where would Matt Damon's character have come from?
Did he get lost going to Albuquerque or something? How did he get there?
He Bugs Bunnied it and ended up in Beijing.
Yeah, like the old Buster Keaton silent movie or something.
Yeah, but it made no sense. I know it's a movie. It's not supposed to make sense. Don't get off my back, internet. But that right there, historical fiction. But it was based off of like one thing, and they turned it into quite possibly something dreadful. I may actually watch it one day.
I got sort of, but then the DVD stuck, which probably saved my life. But I don't even know who his sidekick was, if he had one or anything else. And I thought, I don't know why, I think some people have been in a lot of those martial arts movies like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon and all those, so they knew what they were doing, I guess. But don't know who directed it, don't know anything about it.
No, I just know the plots.
That was enough.
Yeah, that was enough.
So I have one of the best actors around. I think he might be our greatest living actor. He said he's retired now. Is Daniel Day-Lewis. And
yes.
He was in a movie called Gangs of New York, which was a film by Martin Scorsese about the gangs. When immigrants came to America, we had the whole melting pot in New York and everywhere else. We also had violence in a lot of gangs. And this happens where Daniel Day-Lewis is a real bad guy, and he plays this gang leader. What he does is he kills Leo DiCaprio's dad. Did I pronounce that wrong?
No, you said it right.
But they kill his dad, so he tries to get in the gang, ingratiate himself. It's one of those plots that are sort of familiar where he becomes almost a sundu. I think his name's William the Butcher Cuttings is Daniel Day-Lewis's character. And they go through all these different gangs in New York, and a lot of them are real. And if you go through this other fiction, like about Dutch Schultz, all these gangs were actually real things. They used to have these brawls, controlled the city, and everything else in those days. It's an interesting movie just hearing about all these, because you really don't. There's a lot of mob movies, but you don't hear about these a lot.
And much like every other Daniel Day-Lewis movie, he does a fantastic job in it.
Yeah, he does. He's an incredible actor. I mean, there's not much I could say about that. I have another one. This is a really different one. It's almost a case of where it's, again, you take a fictional character and you have a run through events. This one is called Little Big Man. It has Dustin Hoffman as this man born in the 18th century it's almost a Candide take. He goes through a series of things where his family's killed by the natives. He gets adopted. He goes back to the Americans. He's president at Custer's battle. He's president all these different things that happens in the West. And he's a 100-year-old man who's telling his story to Think Faye Dunaway, who's a reporter. And he looks really creepy because he looks like the old grandfather in Texas Chainsaw Massacre under the makeup.
Oh, good
and he's
God.
telling all these stories about Buffalo Bill, about Custer, who I've actually heard in history was not as insane as he's made out to be.
No, those historical figures are not. I mean, it's based on who you ask. Like, look at Sherman. If you ask anybody in the South, he was literally the devil walking the face of the earth. You ask anybody else, I'm going to say he was one of the greatest military minds of all
Here's
time.
a man who I would be afraid to call Uncle Billy, but I guess it was all right.
That was his true. He didn't particularly care for it, but he didn't mind it.
But I'd be afraid. He was not somebody to mess with.
But yes, I mean, so the man burned a major city to the ground, but hey, what are you going to do?
He was very big on war, that war is hell, but he was very good afterwards. You extend the peace branch. But he was brutal, but you would have rather been a troop with him than anybody else because he
because then
probably
you'd have to go against
you.
him. Then you would have to go against him.
But I had one, when I mentioned Little Big Man, another very good historical fiction author is George MacDonald Fraser, who's passed away, but he would write real historical books like about the border wars in Scotland. But for our purposes, he wrote a lot of ones. He wrote Black Ajax about fighting underground and everything in the 20th century. And he wrote about Flashman, who was this sort of cad guy, almost like Sharp, but real cad scoundrel type who found himself in all these wars in Britain in the 18th century. And they're really funny. And he wrote one called The Pirates, which is, he said, imagine the Korngold Symphony. Now we're going to get rid of the real stuff. We're going to play it like that. And he would take historical events, make them really funny, and make this guy was one of these scoundrels who at the end would come out barely, and his grand schemes wouldn't ever work out, but he'd end up being alive and getting away. And there's a movie in the 70s where Malcolm McDowell, whatever his last name, Malcolm McDowell plays him.
That guy?
And it's called Royal Flash. But these books are really good. They're really funny. And these are very good historical authors. So all the historical stuff was right. This guy's just interjected in those.
Well, the one I just actually thought of, because we were talking, I can't remember what we were talking about, but it made me think of it. How about the Disney version of Pocahontas?
I've never seen it, actually.
Well, I mean, obviously, Pocahontas, real person. What was his name? John Smith?
Yeah.
Captain John Smith, real person. Real situations, except for the fact that Pocahontas did not marry John Smith. She married John Rolfe and ended up moving back to England and I think changing her name.
I'm historically ignorant about this. I just don't.
Yeah, I know it didn't pan out that, it was a completely different person that she fell in love with, and I don't even know if they fell in love, but in any event, they got married. She moved back to England, and now there's always that famous etching of her in the frilly collar and the prim and proper English woman attire, and it was the same Pocahontas that was the Native American. I don't know if she was a princess or I don't remember exactly.
Something to read about. I'm sure there's a lot of good books on it.
Oh yeah.
One of the other ones I was going to talk about, too, is Philip Jose Farmer, who's a really famous science fiction author. He wrote the Riverworld series, Gods of Riverworld, whatever of Riverworld.
I've heard that series.
What would happen was these aliens would abduct people who were fictional or real from the U.S., different time periods, stick them on this planet for whatever purposes. There'd be Jack the Ripper, who was William Gull. He was reformed, but there would be real people as well. He would take all these people and use them, sort of collaborate with each other. It was really just interesting because you would go through the history of them and you would see how these characters would interact. And it was fun. None of it was real. And I think Sci-Fi did a movie, so I'm not going to really recommend it. Get the books, but I can't say I've seen it.
I know I think they made a show about it. A show or a miniseries or something.
And it's not River Dance, it's River World.
Well, I don't want to see it now. Because if it's not Michael Flatley, I could give a rat's ass.
And there's actually one more I'm going to bring up because it's one of my all-time favorite movies, Slapshot. And I never thought of this, but when they did the movie, this was a really, really good depiction of hockey in the 70s. It was violent. It was little known, the Broad Street Bullies of this era. And a lot of these leagues, if you read about the old Quebec League, they actually had chains up and stuff because people would get so nuts. This was the story of a minor league hockey team, and I think they stole the plot from Major League. Was the owners going to sell it?
Major League swiped it from Slapshot,
and it was the Charleston Chiefs who were based on
the Johnstown Chiefs of the International Hockey League, but the Charlestown Chiefs were in the Federal League,
and all these people in it just about were real players.
Yeah, a lot of the Hanson brothers. Who actually, only two of them were brothers, although they did look alike.
And one guy was named Hanson for real.
Yeah, there was Dave Hanson, Steve Carlson, and, who was the other Carlson? Jack Carlson?
Yeah, Jack Carlson.
But there was a third Carlson brother who got called up to the NHL and wasn't able to film.
And what happened was Nancy Dowd's brother played hockey, got her into it. She would tape record the locker rooms. A lot of these stories are real.
Did he also not play Ogie Oglethorpe?
Oglethorpe, and Oglethorpe was based on
Bill Goldie Goldthorpe,
who
was
was supposedly a legendary goon. There's a documentary out about him.
Yeah, and I think he actually played AHL hockey in Syracuse.
But look him up. All these guys in the movie, Paul Newman, I guess, skated when he was younger, and he knew the director. But what happened, I think it was George Roy Hill. But what happened was all these guys were real, and you look them up. They brought Poodle. What's one of these guys? Gilmore Tuttle. Got banned or something.
I thought he was banned forever, and there was the guy who played Gilmore Tuttle was banned for life from the ECHL, not for violence but for gambling. But I think when he was kicked out, he was and maybe still is the all-time penalty minute leader in ECHL history.
And the incident where one of the Hansons gets pelted with something and he'll beat the hell out of everybody.
Yeah, that was true.
That was supposedly based on something true. All these incidents.
I think the fight before the national anthem happened.
One of the ironies of it was afterwards, Nancy Dowd also wrote Coming Home, but she became very disenchanted with Hollywood because her career never went on. And there's actually a very good book about Slapshot if you'd like to read it. What happened was she tried to sue the Hansons because they still around make appearances and everything else. And they said, hey, you got all these stories from us. And actually, you have a little tie into one of the Hansons from a relative.
Well, actually, my stepmom used to skate at an ice skating rink at Robert Morris University in Pittsburgh. And Dave Hanson of the Hanson brothers, actually, I don't know if he still is or was the manager at the time. And she didn't know who he was until she saw the picture on the wall of him with the other two and him with Paul Newman. And she said, Dave, what's this? Like, I was, in a movie back in the day. And I sent her and my dad the cover of the Sports Illustrated with the Hanson brothers and had him sign it. It was Tuzak putting on the foil. If you've seen the movie, you'll know what I'm talking about.
And wasn't Dowd's brother going to play one of the Hansons, or didn't somebody? No, he got called up.
What happened was the three Carlson brothers were supposed to play the Hanson brothers. Dave Hanson was supposed to play Dave Killer Carlson. But then when the third Carlson brother got called up to the NHL, because he actually looked like them, they moved him up to the third Hanson brother, and it was an actor that played Dave Killer Carlson.
Oh, Dave's a killer.
You know, Dave's a mess.
He does a lot of. I constantly forget his name. I think it's Jerry.
Jerry something. He does a lot of voice work.
A lot of voiceover work, but Dave's a killer.
I think he was the voice of like Ernie the Keebler Elf at some point, or
which
one
is
of the
really
Keebler Elves.
Cool, but
yeah, but it sums it up perfectly in Slapshot when he said Ned Braden's here, and he is a rarity among hockey players today. He's a college graduate and an American citizen.
And the irony of the movie is the plot in the movie, which is unbelievable at the time, is the rich owner wants to move hockey to Florida because there's a lot of senior citizens. Now, what happened later on? The Florida Panthers, Tampa Bay Lightning, and all these others, it actually came to fruition, which was amazing because that was the plot. I mean, it's like, that's crazy.
Yeah, and you had the Stars moving from Minnesota to Dallas.
And they bring up a lot of things like Eddie Shore, Cement Head.
Piss on Eddie Shore. Old-time hockey?
Yep, old-time hockey.
Piss on old-time
Buy
hockey.
your soda.
Yeah, well, because of our outburst there, the librarian has now threatened to break us, unfortunately. So I guess much like our talking points, we too are history. So I'm going to throw out give our shout out to our lovely sponsor, Upsitnik and Associates. Legal. God, I butchered that one. Sorry, everybody.
That was history.
Oh, that was history making indeed. Upsitnik and Associates, law advice for you, the people, from the Supreme Court in Washington all the way to Alaska and all points in between. Visit them online, upsitnikslaw.com. That's OPSITNICK.
It's on our site sometime, too.
And it's on,
I can't spell it.
Trust me, click below. It's in the description.
Yeah, I can't blow it. But I think we're past our due date. We better get out of here. What?
Yeah.
So,
but yeah,
and the other thing I have to do is I actually met Denise Crosby. Here's some shameless name dropping. She was a sweetheart, and I promised to say hi, Denise. This was the highlight of my month meeting you, and we got to talk about Fred Gwynn and his children's books and funny other stories. So, hi, Denise.
Hello, Denise. You are amazing, and we love you. So, for all of us here at the Carnival of Randomness, and basically all of us, I mean me and Rob, get ye to your library, read some historical fiction, then read some actual fiction. And
we will have some real characters down the line for you. Maybe we'll have some fictional, too. You never know.
Could be fictional, could be real. And, well, that be that.
Thanks, see you later.